The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that happens right after a sound stops, when everyone in a room is still bracing for it to start again. My mother was standing now, one hand flat on the conference table like she needed it to hold her up, her mouth open around a word that never came out. The attorney beside her had stopped writing mid-sentence, his pen hovering an inch above the legal pad. And me? I just sat there, hands folded, watching 17 years of her certainty collapse in real time. My name is Renata Cole. I'm 31 years old, and the woman standing across that table from me hasn't called me daughter since I was 14. 3 weeks before that moment, she'd walked into a downtown office tower wearing pearls she only takes out for funerals, flanked by a $5,000 lawyer, absolutely certain she was about to become a millionaire. She left less than an hour later, without saying a word to anyone, walked straight past the elevator she'd arrived in, and took the stairs down 19 floors rather than stand next to me for 60 more seconds. I'm not telling you this story because I want you to feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because somewhere out there, someone watching this right now is sitting on a porch step of their own, wondering if they imagine the whole thing, wondering if they're the problem. I need you to know you're not. Stay with me to the end because this story has a turn in it that I still think about most nights before I fall asleep, and I promise you it's worth the wait. And while we're here, tell me where you're watching from tonight and what time it is for you. I read every single comment, every time. To understand what happened in that room, you have to go back almost 2 decades to a Tuesday in October that started like any other and ended with my whole life rearranged. I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in a brick split level on a street where every lawn looked the same and every family performed normal for the neighbors. My father, Gerald Whitfield, sold insurance and rarely raised his voice, mostly because he rarely spoke at all once my mother was in the room. My mother, Pamela, ran every space she entered, including the ones she physically wasn't in. She had a gift, and I mean that with no warmth at all, for making you feel lucky just to be tolerated under her roof. I had an older brother, Connor, 3 years ahead of me, who could do no wrong in her eyes before he'd even had the chance to do anything. He had her sharp jaw, her quick temper, her effortless way of pulling a room's attention toward himself without trying. I had my father's quiet eyes and my late grandmother's stubborn mouth, and somehow that combination unsettled my mother in ways she never once explained to me, and I spent years trying to stop needing an explanation. The favoritism was never subtle once you knew to look for it. Connor's 16th birthday got a rented hall, a hired DJ, and 40 guests. Mine, 2 months later, got a box of cupcakes from the gas station because Mom said she was, and I'm quoting her exactly, birthdayed out. When I was 11, I found out by accident that Connor had a trust fund our grandfather had opened the year he was born. I asked my mother why I didn't have one. She didn't even look up from the laundry she was folding. "Connor's the one worth investing in," she said, the same tone she'd used to read off a grocery list. The breaking point came the October I turned 14. That spring, without telling a single person in my house, I'd applied to a residency program at a regional science and technology academy, a 6-week intensive for students who tested into the top percentile in math and physics across 3 states. It was a full ride. Housing, meals, materials, all of it. Out of more than 1,500 applicants, 60 students got in. I was one of them. I didn't get to celebrate for long. Connor had just been cut from his travel baseball team and was sulking about a private hitting coach that cost $2,800 for the summer. At dinner that night, my mother announced her solution to the table like she was assigning chores. The academy was, in her words, an unnecessary luxury, and the money we'd save by me declining it would go toward Connor's coaching instead. Because baseball, unlike some science camp, was actually going to take him somewhere. I said no, out loud at that table, maybe for the very first time in my entire life. I told her it wasn't her scholarship to give away to anyone. I told her I'd earned it myself. She didn't yell. That was always the most frightening version of her, the quiet one. She got very still, very calm, and told me that if I couldn't make one sacrifice for this family, then maybe I didn't understand what family even meant. 3 days later, I came home from school to find 2 suitcases sitting on the front step and the locks already changed underneath me. My mother stood in the doorway and told me, without a single crack in her voice, that she'd already called my Aunt Lorraine. I was Lorraine's responsibility now. My father stood behind her in the hallway and said absolutely nothing. Connor watched from the top of the stairs for a few seconds, and then went back to his room before I'd even managed to pick up the first suitcase. I sat on that step from 4 in the afternoon until almost 10 at night. 6 hours. Nobody came back outside. The porch light never once turned on, even after the streetlights did. My Aunt Lorraine lived 2 hours away in Bartlesville. She'd never married, never had children of her own, and had built a small chain of regional storage and logistics warehouses from a single rented unit in her 20s into 11 properties across northeastern Oklahoma. When her headlights finally swung into that driveway, and she saw me sitting on those suitcases in the dark, she didn't ask me a single question. She just got out of the car, crouched down, wrapped both arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe, and said the only sentence that mattered to me that whole year. You have a home now. That part of your life is over. What I didn't know that night, and wouldn't learn for 17 more years, was that before Lorraine pulled out of that driveway, my mother had handed her a manila folder and asked her to sign something on the hood of the car. I was too young, too stunned, too busy trying not to cry in front of an aunt I barely knew to register what was happening 4 feet away from me. I wouldn't think about that folder again for a long, long time. Lorraine didn't just give me a roof over my head. She gave me an entire future. I finished high school in Bartlesville as valedictorian, got into the University of Oklahoma's business program on a partial scholarship, and graduated with honors in finance. From the time I was 16, Lorraine had been bringing me into her warehouses on weekends, teaching me leases, inventory systems, vendor negotiations, the unglamorous bones of how a real business actually survives. After 2 years at a regional accounting firm and earning my CPA license, she offered me a position as controller at Whitfield Logistics. Yes, she kept the family name even after everything that family had done, because she always said it was never the name that had hurt me. By 27, I was CFO. By 30, the company's footprint had grown to 19 properties valued north of $30 million, and most of that growth had my fingerprints all over it. In 17 years, my birth family reached out to me exactly 3 times, and I remember every single one of them with painful clarity. The first was in 2013, when my father called Lorraine's phone, not mine, asking for an emergency loan after losing his job. Lorraine said no, and told me about it afterward with her jaw set tight as a fist. They didn't ask one question about you, she said. Not one. The second was in 2017, when Connor mailed a wedding invitation to Lorraine's address with my name printed on the envelope and nothing inside it but the formal card. No note, no warmth, just an obligation somebody had checked off a list. I didn't go, and I didn't send a gift. The third was in 2021, when my mother emailed me out of nowhere after stumbling on an article about Whitfield Logistics expanding into Kansas. The subject line read, "Proud of you." I read it twice, felt absolutely nothing, and deleted it. By then, I wasn't angry anymore. I had simply built a life that no longer needed her opinion attached to it. In the late summer of last year, everything shifted again. Lorraine was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors gave her months, not years. She spent that fall quietly putting her affairs in order, meeting with her estate attorney more times than she ever mentioned to me. When I finally asked her about it directly, she just smiled and patted my hand. "Don't worry about the paperwork," she said. "I've handled people trying to take things from you before. I'll handle it from the grave too if I have to." I laughed it off at the time. I had no idea how literally she meant it. I would find out eventually, in a conference room neither of us could have predicted 17 years earlier. Lorraine passed away peacefully in January, with me holding her hand the entire time. 12 days later, my phone rang with a Tulsa area code I hadn't seen in years. Renata. My mother's voice hadn't changed one bit. Still that particular way of saying my name, like she was deciding in real time whether I'd earned the right to hear it. "I heard about Lorraine. I'm so sorry. I was thinking I should come for the service, pay my respects as family." "The service was last week," I said. A pause, and I could practically hear her recalculating. "Well, I also heard there's a will reading. I think family has every right to be present for something like that." There it was. The real reason for the call, finally surfacing. 2 days later, Lorraine's estate attorney, a sharp, soft-spoken woman named Diane Okafor, called to confirm exactly what I'd already suspected. My mother had retained an attorney named Russell Pruitt and filed a formal notice contesting the will, alleging undue influence, claiming I had isolated a dying woman from her real family in her final months in order to secure her fortune for myself. They were demanding to be recognized as next of kin and given a seat at the reading. Diane laid it all out plainly in her office downtown, rain sliding down the windows behind her desk. "They're arguing your father should inherit under intestacy principles, as Lorraine's only surviving sibling, on the theory that the will itself was the product of manipulation. They're asking for 40% of the estate minimum just to walk away quietly." "They don't even need to win," she added, when I didn't say anything right away. "They just need to drag it out. A contested estate can sit frozen in probate for a year, sometimes 2. Properties don't get managed properly during that time, tenants leave, value erodes. They're betting you'll pay them simply to make the headache disappear." I asked Diane if there was anything on file from that October 17 years ago. Anything that documented what had actually happened the night I left. She said she'd check the archive, and 20 minutes later her assistant came back carrying a thin, yellowed folder I had never once seen in my life. Diane opened it, read for a moment in total silence, and then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen cross her face before. "Renata, did you know about this?" She slid a single page across the desk toward me. The header read, "Voluntary relinquishment of parental rights and transfer of permanent guardianship. Notarized in Washington County, Oklahoma. dated 3 days after I'd sat on that porch step. My mother's signature was there. My father's signature was there. Lorraine's signature was there. A notary seal sat underneath all three, official and final, and 17 years old. They didn't just kick you out, Diane said quietly. They legally gave you up, in writing, with witnesses standing right there. Your father has no standing to claim anything as your parent because the law says he stopped being one 17 years ago by his own hand on the hood of a car in your old driveway. Diane gave me 2 paths forward. We could settle quietly, offer $600,000 or $700,000 for a signed waiver releasing any future claims, and make the entire thing disappear without ever becoming public. Or we could let the will reading proceed exactly as scheduled, let them sit in that room and claim the family title they'd abandoned, and let the truth do what truth does best when nobody's left to stop it. I thought about an email Lorraine had sent me on my 26th birthday, the one I still have saved in a folder I never delete, the one that ended with a single line. You don't owe them a single thing, but you owe yourself the truth, out loud, at least once. I told Diane to proceed with the reading. No settlement, no quiet exit. If they wanted a seat at that table so badly, I'd let them sit in it. The reading was set for a Friday afternoon in February in a glass-walled conference room on the 19th floor of a downtown Tulsa office tower. I arrived early, in a charcoal suit, hair pulled back, walking the way Lorraine had always told me powerful people walk into a room, quietly, without announcing themselves. Representatives from 3 of Lorraine's longtime charities were already seated along the wall, alongside her longtime accountant and 4 senior staff from Whitfield Logistics who had known me since I was 16 and stacking inventory in a warehouse on weekends. At 2 minutes past 2, the elevator doors opened. My mother stepped out first, in a black dress and pearls she clearly hadn't worn since the last funeral she attended. My father followed, gray-faced, his eyes already finding the floor. Connor came next, looking like a man who would rather be standing anywhere else on earth. And behind all 3 of them, a tall, silver-haired attorney carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. My mother surveyed the room like she already owned it. "You're here already," she said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. I didn't stand. "Sandra," I said, not Mom. Just her name, flat as a door closing. She faltered for half a second before recovering, suggesting we speak privately as family first. Diane stood and gently redirected all 4 of them to chairs lined up along the wall. The main table, she explained, was reserved for beneficiaries and estate representatives. My mother's jaw tightened visibly at being placed with the spectators instead of the table she had flown in expecting to command. She didn't take her seat quietly. On her way over, she paused beside one of the charity representatives, introduced herself as Lorraine's sister-in-law, very close for many years, and added, just loud enough for half the room to hear, that it was tragic how certain people insert themselves into a family and turn everyone against each other. Connor muttered something about not understanding why I got to sit at the table while they sat against the wall. Their attorney took notes through all of it, hunting for any reaction he could use later. I gave him nothing. I'd learned a long time ago that my mother fed entirely on an audience, and the simplest way to take that power back was to refuse to perform for her. At 2:10, Diane broke the seal on the will. This is the last will and testament of Lorraine Ann Whitfield, she began, her voice carrying the formal weight the moment demanded. Executed on September the 3rd of last year, representing her final wishes regarding the disposition of her estate. She noted, almost as an aside that landed like thunder across the room, that the will had been signed 9 days after an independent psychiatric capacity evaluation conducted specifically because Lorraine, in her own words to Diane, wanted to make sure nobody could ever say I wasn't in my right mind when I did this. I watched my mother's confident posture falter for the first time since she'd stepped off that elevator. Diane moved through the formalities, the revocation of all prior wills, the declaration of sound mind, the inventory of an estate that had grown, under my stewardship, from roughly $19 million to just over 31. And then she reached the article my mother had clearly been waiting for since she walked in the door, the one naming beneficiaries. What my mother didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Lorraine hadn't simply written me into a will and left it there. She had written an entire account of what she'd witnessed that October night 17 years earlier, attached it as a formal addendum, and stapled the guardianship document directly behind it, with instructions that it be read into the record specifically in the event anyone ever showed up claiming a blood right to money they had never once tried to be part of earning. She had anticipated this exact room, this exact moment, down to the chairs lined up against the wall. She'd spent her final months making absolutely certain that if my mother ever tried to walk back into my life through a courtroom instead of an apology, the truth would already be sitting there waiting for her, signed, sealed, and impossible to argue with. Diane turned the page. She looked up once, directly at my mother's pale, frozen face, and kept reading. That was the moment. The one I described at the very beginning of this story. My mother on her feet, one hand flat against the table, her mouth open around a word that never came. Russell Pruitt's pen frozen an inch above his legal pad. My father staring at the floor like it might open up and take him somewhere else. Connor, for the first time in his entire life, with absolutely nothing to say. I'm not going to tell you the exact dollar figure that addendum protected, or repeat word for word what Lorraine wrote about what she'd witnessed on that porch 17 years earlier. Some things deserve to stay between the people who actually lived them. What I will tell you is everything that happened after that room finally emptied out. My mother didn't say a single word to me before she left. She walked past the elevator she'd arrived in and took the stairwell down 19 flights instead. And I only found that out later from one of the charity representatives who'd seen her push through the stairwell door with her heels still in her hand. Russell Pruitt withdrew the entire challenge within 10 days, once he'd had time to actually sit with the guardianship document and understand there was no case left standing for him to make. My father called once, 3 weeks later, and left a voicemail that was 40 seconds long and said almost nothing at all. Just that he was sorry, in a voice that sounded like he didn't fully believe it himself. I saved it. I haven't deleted it yet, and I'm honestly not sure if I ever will. My mother sent exactly one more email after that, not an apology, just 3 clipped lines insisting she had only ever wanted what was best for the family. I didn't delete that one either. I just never answered it. And for the first time in 17 years, the silence on my end didn't feel like punishment or grief or even anger. It felt like peace, settling somewhere I hadn't realized had been empty my whole life. Connor reached out once, in March, asking if we could get coffee sometime. No pressure, just to talk. I haven't said yes yet. I might, eventually. I'm in no rush to decide. I kept the warehouse. I kept the house in Bartlesville, the one with the spare room that became entirely mine the night I arrived, with nothing but 2 suitcases and a stranger's promise. I had Lorraine's name added to a small scholarship fund at the same science academy that had once cost me my place at that dinner table. Because somewhere out there, this year, there's a 14-year-old who just got an acceptance letter and doesn't know yet whether anyone in their house is going to celebrate with them. I wanted there to be at least one program in this country where a kid like that never has to find out the hard way. I used to think the day I finally won against my mother would feel like triumph, like fireworks, like every movie scene I'd ever imagined in my head during those 4 hours on that porch step. It didn't feel like that at all. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for almost 2 decades without ever quite noticing I'd been doing it. Lorraine gave me a home the night I had nowhere else to go. But the gift she left me in that conference room, after she was already gone, after she could no longer hug me or tell me it was going to be okay, was something even bigger than the money or the properties or any of it. She gave me proof. Proof, read aloud in her own carefully chosen words in a room full of witnesses who couldn't look away, that I had never once been the problem in that family. I had simply been the only one brave enough to leave it. If you've stayed with me this whole way, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to read your answer in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you first, just so you could finally feel safe? If you have, I want you to know you're not alone in that, and you never were, not for one single day. If this story meant something to you tonight, give it a thumbs up so it finds someone else who needs to hear it. And subscribe if you want more stories like Lorraine's, because the people who quietly build a better life for someone else, without ever once asking for credit, deserve to have their stories told too. I'll see you in the next one.